The Last Voyage of the Lost Ship.
Welcome. If you're here right now, you've probably had a long day and need a little time to rest. Lie back comfortably, slow your breathing, and feel your shoulders relax. If these stories help you drift off to sleep, you can subscribe to the channel. That way, every night, a new story will be waiting for you here. Now, you don't need to do anything. Just listen. And slowly, let yourself drift into sleep.
That night, the sea had never been so silent. It was as if even the waves were holding their breath. It was November of 1872, and somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, at an uncertain point, the ship called Dei Gratia was continuing its routine. Captain David Reed Morehouse stood on the deck, scanning the horizon. The wind was light, the sea was calm. Everything was more than normally normal. Perhaps that was why the unease inside him deepened even further when he noticed that ship. In the distance, on the deep blue water, a drifting sailing ship had appeared. Its sails were half open, drifting aimlessly without a course or purpose. Morehouse took his binoculars and began to examine the ship. Something was wrong. The ship was not under control, but it was not sunk either. It was just empty. A feeling inside him whispered that this was not an ordinary situation. "Mr. DeVoe," he called out to the first mate, "do you see that ship?" Oliver DeVoe turned his binoculars in that direction as well. He watched silently. He had years of experience, but he had never seen a sight like this. Then he nodded his head. "I see it, Captain, but something is wrong." Morehouse nodded. "We're going alongside. Prepare the lifeboat." Dei Gratia slowly approached the mysterious ship. The wind blew gently, filling the sails, but there was not a single movement on the deck of the ship. There was no one there. It was like a ghost ship, something only heard about in stories, but this was real. 2 hours later, DeVoe and 2 crew members, John Wright and John Johnson, stepped onto the deck of the mysterious ship. Their footsteps echoed on the wet wood. The silence was piercing. The ship still swayed enigmatically, dancing with the waves, but there was no sign of life inside. DeVoe walked toward the bow of the ship. There he read the name carved in golden letters, Mary Celeste, New York. "I know this ship. Captain Benjamin Briggs's ship, an old friend of Captain Morehouse's." Wright looked around. But where is the crew? That was the question. Where were the 10 people? Benjamin Spooner Briggs was a man Morehouse had known and respected years earlier. He was in his 40s, an experienced captain. He was sailing from New York to Genoa with his wife, Sarah Elizabeth Briggs, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia Matilda. There were 7 more crew members on board. First mate Albert Richardson, second mate Andrew Gilling, 4 sailors, and the ship's cook. 10 people in total, all missing. DeVoe carefully examined the deck. The helm was unattended. The railings on the starboard side were slightly damaged. The ropes were scattered, but the ship itself was sound. There were no holes in the hull. It was not taking on water. The pumps were working. The cargo hatch was open. That was strange. Captains would close the cargo hatch even in a storm. "Go below," DeVoe said. "Search every corner. Be careful." Wright and Johnson went down. DeVoe, meanwhile, moved toward the cabin. When he opened the door, it was dim and silent inside. There was food and water. There were 6 months' worth of provisions on the ship. The barrels were full. The dining sets were in place. Nothing had been stolen. He entered Captain Briggs' cabin. It was a tidy cabin. There were papers on the table, the logbook, charts, calculations. A clock on the wall had stopped. In the corner, there was a small doll. It must have belonged to Sophia. DeVoe bent down and picked it up. It was made of cloth, with a blue dress. It was still new, still clean. A father had given this doll to his little daughter. A mother had perhaps sewn it, cherished it. And now this toy stood here in an empty cabin without its owner. DeVoe swallowed. He checked Sarah's cabin. Her sewing was unfinished. The threads were still on the needle. It was as if she had been sitting here sewing just minutes earlier, then stood up and left. But where? Wright climbed the stairs. "Mr. DeVoe, there's water below, but not much. It doesn't exceed a meter. The ship won't sink." DeVoe nodded. "Food?" "Plenty, and there's water. All the barrels are full. Wait a minute." Wright hesitated. "No, wait. 9 alcohol barrels have been emptied, but the others are intact."
This was interesting. The ship's cargo was alcohol, industrial alcohol, the non-drinkable kind. There were 1,701 barrels. If 9 of them had emptied, that meant a leak. Perhaps vapor had built up. In an enclosed space, alcohol vapor is dangerous. It is explosive. But there were no signs of an explosion on the ship, no signs of fire. There was only emptiness. DeVoe went down to the galley. The stove was cold, but there were pots on it. Inside them were remnants of food, boiled rice, some meat. Plates were left on the table. There was a half-eaten loaf of bread. Cups were overturned, the tea inside them dried. It was as if the crew had suddenly stood up while eating and never returned. But why? What had made them leave in such a hurry? Johnson called out from the captain's cabin, "Mr. DeVoe, come here." DeVoe ran over. Johnson was pointing at the navigational instruments. "Look, the chronometer is gone. The sextant is gone. The navigation log is gone." DeVoe checked the shelves. Johnson was right. The most valuable instruments on the ship, the tools needed to determine position, were missing. The captain had taken them with him. This was not a panicked escape. At least the captain had thought and prepared. "The lifeboat?" DeVoe asked. Wright went outside to check. "The lifeboat is gone. The davits are empty. The ropes are cut." There it was. The crew had abandoned the ship in the lifeboat. But why? DeVoe stepped onto the deck. He looked up at the sky. The weather was good. The wind was light. There was no sign of a storm. The waves were normal. The ship was sound. There was food. There was water. Why would a captain abandon such a ship? The unanswered question hung in the air. Imagine this. If you were standing on the deck of that ship, you look around, and everything is in its place. The meals are cooked. The beds are made. The clothes are in the wardrobes. But 10 people have vanished, without a trace. Not a single sign of a struggle. Not a single drop of blood. Just silence. And that silence may be the most disturbing thing of all, because the ship is alive. The wood creaks, the ropes rustle, the sails flap, but there is no human voice, no sound of breathing, laughter, conversation, or shouting. None of it exists.
DeVoe looked toward the Dei Gratia. Morehouse was standing on the deck, waiting for him. The distance between the two ships was about 100 meters. The waves gently lapped against the sides of the vessels. The sun was beginning to set. The sky turned orange, then purple. "What did you find?" Morehouse called out. "Nothing, Captain," DeVoe replied. "And everything. The ship is sound. The cargo is intact. There are provisions, but there is no crew and no lifeboat." Morehouse remained silent for a long time. The wind gently ruffled his hair. Then he spoke. "Take the ship to port, Mr. DeVoe. Wright and Johnson will stay with you. We're heading to Gibraltar. We'll meet there." DeVoe nodded. He knew what he meant. Under maritime law, a crew that salvaged an abandoned ship was entitled to a salvage reward. Mary Celeste was valuable. Its cargo was valuable. But what Morehouse was thinking about was not money. It was solving the mystery, and perhaps learning what had happened to his old friend. Night fell. DeVoe, Wright, and Johnson remained on the deck of the Mary Celeste. The Dei Gratia moved on, slowly drifting away, and the 3 men were left alone on a ghost ship in the middle of an endless ocean. The moon rose. Its silver light illuminated the wooden deck. Shadows stretched, shortened, and stretched again. The ship swayed gently. The ropes creaked. The sails fluttered softly. Wright lit a lantern. Its yellow light illuminated the dim deck. "Strange," he said. "It's as if this place is waiting." "Waiting for what?" Johnson asked. "I don't know. Maybe for its owners." DeVoe did not speak, but Wright was right. The ship felt incomplete, like an unfinished story, and its final page was missing. The 3 men slept in shifts. One was always awake, at the helm, checking the course, watching the wind. The night passed slowly. They dreamed, perhaps nightmares. When morning came, the sun rose again. Its golden light struck the water, glittering like millions of diamonds. The sea was still calm, the sky was clear, and the Mary Celeste continued on her way, silently, without passengers, carrying a secret.
The following days passed in a similar way. DeVoe steered the ship. He was experienced, knowledgeable. The Mary Celeste was a good ship, easy to handle. When the wind was sufficient, they moved quickly. When the wind weakened, they slowed down, but they were always moving forward. At night, the 3 men talked. They discussed what might have happened to the crew. They came up with theories. "Maybe there was a pirate attack," Johnson said one night. "They might have abducted the crew." Wright shook his head. "But why didn't they take the cargo? Why did they leave the valuables behind? Maybe there wasn't enough time." "No," DeVoe said. "If there had been a pirate attack, there would have been blood, there would have been signs of a struggle, but there's nothing. The ship is clean. So what happened? DeVoe could not answer. No one could. Another night, Wright proposed a different theory. Maybe the crew mutinied. They killed the captain, took over the ship, then escaped in the lifeboat. Benjamin Briggs was a respectable man. He chose his crew carefully. And why would they abandon the ship? Everything they needed was on board. Maybe to hide the crime. But where are the bodies? Where is the blood? Again, unanswered questions. Johnson put forward the strangest theory. Maybe something supernatural happened. Maybe a creature came out of the sea and took them all. Wright laughed. Nonsense. Sea monsters are fairy tales. But there are things we can't explain. There are always things that can't be explained. That doesn't make them supernatural. DeVoe stepped in. There must be a rational explanation. Maybe it was alcohol vapor. 9 barrels were emptied. Perhaps the captain abandoned the ship for fear of an explosion. But why didn't they come back? Maybe the rope snapped. Maybe they lost the ship. This was the most logical explanation, but it was not certain. On the 4th day, a storm approached. The sky darkened. Clouds gathered. The wind grew stronger. The waves rose. The Mary Celeste began to sway, at first gently, then violently. "Lower the sails," DeVoe shouted. "Quick!" Wright and Johnson loosened the ropes. The sails came down with a roar. The ship was still rocking, but it was more controlled. Rain began. First light drops, then a heavy downpour. The 3 men took shelter in the cabin. Outside, the storm howled. Lightning split the sky. Thunderclaps deafened their ears. The ship rose and fell with every wave. "We're going to sink," Johnson shouted. "No," DeVoe replied. "The ship is sound. It will hold." And it did. The storm lasted for hours. It continued through the night, but the Mary Celeste was strong. Its wooden hull was solid. The sails were down. The helm was lashed and secured. When morning came, the storm had passed. The sky had cleared again. The sun began to shine. The sea slowly calmed. DeVoe went out onto the deck. He checked everything. The damage was minimal. A few ropes had snapped. A few planks had cracked. But the ship was still afloat. "We're lucky," said Wright. "We're not lucky," DeVoe corrected him. "We just have a good ship." But inwardly he thought, perhaps Benjamin Briggs had been caught in such a storm. Perhaps he had been afraid, not just for himself, but for his wife and his little daughter. Perhaps abandoning the ship had seemed like the safest option. But then why was the ship still perfectly sound? On the 8th day, the shores of Gibraltar came into view. First a blurred line, then clear rocks, then the harbor. The Dei Gratia was sailing ahead of them. Morehouse was keeping the correct course. The Mary Celeste slowly entered the harbor. People gathered on the quay. They watched with curiosity. A silent ship, crewed by 3 men. The story had spread. An abandoned ship, a missing crew, a mystery.
Devoe dropped anchor. Wright and Johnson secured the lines. The ship came to a stop. The journey was over. Morehouse met them. "Any trouble?" "A storm," said Devoe, "but the ship is sturdy. No serious damage." "Good. Now we're going to court."
The Vice Admiralty Court, the Maritime Court, was a serious place. Judge Sir James Cochrane was impartial but meticulous. He was an expert in maritime law. His decisions were firm and fair. Morehouse and Devoe gave their statements. They explained how they had found the ship, what they had seen, and how they had brought it to Gibraltar. Every detail was recorded. Every question was asked. Court officials examined the Mary Celeste from bow to stern. Frederick Solly Flood, the Queen's proctor, the court's prosecutor, was skeptical. He was not an honest man. He was someone who loved conspiracies and judged quickly. "This ship was deliberately abandoned," Flood said. "Perhaps the crew mutinied. Perhaps this is a scheme to collect insurance money." Morehouse became angry. Benjamin Briggs was an honest man. He would never do such a thing. "But do you have proof?" "I knew him. That is enough." "Not in court." Flood claimed there were bloodstains on the deck. Experts checked. They were alcohol and rust, not blood. Flood said the starboard railings had been cut by sword blows. Experts checked. It was only water damage, not a sword. Flood persisted but found no evidence. Because there was no crime. There was no crime, only mystery. The court lasted for days. Witnesses were called, experts testified, documents were examined, and finally a decision was made. The Mary Celeste is awarded salvage status. The crew of the Dei Gratia is entitled to a salvage reward. Morehouse let out a sigh of relief, but he was not happy. Because the real question had not been answered. What had happened to Benjamin Briggs? The salvage reward was paid, but it was far less than expected. The ship's value was around $46,000. A normal salvage reward would have been 50%, meaning $23,000. But the court awarded only $8,300. Flood's suspicions had had an effect. Morehouse had not done it for the money, but it was still unjust. Devoe, Wright, and Johnson had taken risks. They had sailed for 8 days with a ghost ship. They had been caught in a storm, and the reward was laughable. But that was life. It was not fair. The Mary Celeste was repaired and returned to service. A new captain was appointed. A new crew was assembled. The ship put to sea once again. But its luck had not turned. Among sailors, it was known as a cursed ship. It was difficult to find crew. No one wanted to work on that ship, because there was a mystery, and mysteries made people uneasy. The ship changed hands several times. Every owner suffered losses. One went bankrupt. One committed suicide. Another was arrested. And finally, in 1885, its last owner, Gilman C. Parker, deliberately ran the ship aground off the coast of Haiti for insurance fraud. But he was caught, put on trial. His career was over. The Mary Celeste remained there. The waves tore it apart. The sun rotted its wood. Years passed, and the ship slowly disappeared. But its story did not end. Benjamin Spooner Briggs was 37 years old when his ship vanished. He was born in Massachusetts into a seafaring family. His father, Nathan Briggs, was also a captain. His brother, Oliver, was a captain as well. The sea was his life. Sarah Elizabeth Briggs was 31 years old. She was a beautiful, gentle, educated woman. She loved Nathan Briggs. They had 2 children, Arthur Stanley and Sophia Matilda. Arthur had stayed behind at school and did not join this voyage. Only little Sophia had come along. She was 2 years old, innocent, joyful. Albert G. Richardson was 28 years old, the first mate. He was experienced, reliable. Briggs trusted him. Andrew Gilling was 25 years old, the second mate. He was Danish, spoke Danish, but his English was good. There were 4 sailors. Volkert Lorentzen and Bas Lorentzen were brothers of German origin. Arian Martens was Dutch. Gottlieb Goodschall was also German. The ship's cook was Edward William Head. He was the only American among the crew. 10 people, 10 lives, 10 stories. All of them vanished at once. The Mary Celeste departed from New York on November 5, 1972. The weather was bad. There were storms. Briggs was a cautious captain, and they waited. They remained at the dock for weeks. Finally, on November 7th, they set out. The destination was Genoa. The cargo was industrial alcohol, 1,701 barrels. It came from the Fortuna refinery. The buyer was a company in Genoa. It was an ordinary cargo. The voyage began normally. Briggs wrote in the log every day the weather, position, speed, wind direction. It was routine.
November 14. Weather is fine. Wind favorable. Speed 8 knots. November 20. A storm is approaching. We reduced sail. November 24. The weather has improved. We are near the Azores. November 25, morning. The final entry. We are 6 miles east of Santa Maria Island. Weather clear. And then, nothing. Silence. 9 days later, the Dei Gratia found them. But what happened during those 9 days? Over the years, theories multiplied. Everyone put forward an idea. Some were logical, some were absurd, none were certain. Theory 1. Seaquake. Perhaps an underwater earthquake occurred. The shaking rocked the ship. The crew panicked and abandoned it. But there was no damage to the ship, and why was the ship so orderly afterward? Theory 2. Hurricane. Perhaps a hurricane struck, but weather records showed there was no major storm on those days, and the ship was almost undamaged. Theory 3. Pirates. Perhaps pirates from North Africa attacked, but the valuables were untouched, and a pirate attack would have involved blood. Theory 4. Mutiny. Perhaps the mutiny mutinied, but Briggs was a good captain. He had chosen his crew, and a mutiny would have involved a struggle. Theory 5. Insurance fraud. Perhaps Briggs deliberately abandoned the ship to collect the insurance money, but Briggs was not wealthy, yet he was honest. It made no sense to put his wife and small daughter at such risk, and where would they have fled? Theory 6. Sea monster / supernatural. Nonsense. Not scientific, but people like to believe in mysterious things. The most plausible theory was proposed in 2006 by Dr. Andrea Sella. Sella was a chemist and investigated the Mary Celeste for a BBC science program. His theory was this: 9 of the alcohol barrels had emptied. There was likely a leak. Alcohol vapor accumulated in the hold. On the morning of November 25th, the air began to warm. The sun heated the ship's wooden hull. The temperature inside the hold rose. The pressure increased. And then, a small explosion. Perhaps the hatch blew open. Perhaps flames burst out, but briefly, only for a few seconds. There was no physical damage, but the sound was terrifying. Briggs was on deck. He heard the explosion. He saw the flames, and he thought, the ship is going to explode. He thought of his wife, his daughter. He thought of the crew. The entire ship was full of alcohol. If it truly exploded, everyone would die.
Abandon the ship, he gave the order, immediately. The crew lowered the lifeboat. All 10 boarded. Briggs quickly took the navigational instruments, the chronometer, the sextant. Without them, position could not be determined. Their plan was simple. They would move away from the ship and wait. If the ship exploded, at least they would survive. If it did not, they would return. The lifeboat was tied to the ship with a rope. They rowed away. 100 meters, 200 meters, a safe distance. And they waited. But the ship did not explode. An hour passed, 2 hours. The ship was still perfectly sound. No explosion, no fire. "Let's go back," Briggs said. The crew began to row, but the wind had changed. It had strengthened. The ship began to move under sail. It sped up, and the rope snapped. Perhaps it was already weak. Perhaps the tension was too great. Perhaps it was just bad luck. But it snapped. The Mary Celeste glided forward. The wind filled the sails. The ship accelerated. The lifeboat was left behind. "Row!" Briggs shouted. "Faster!" All 10 rowed. Their arms burned. Their breath ran out. They sweated. They groaned. But the ship was faster. With every second, it grew a little farther away. With every minute, it grew a little smaller. And 2 hours later, it disappeared beyond the horizon. The small lifeboat was left in the middle of the ocean. The Azores were about 600 miles to the west, but reaching them by rowing was impossible. Briggs looked at the chronometer. He took the sextant in his hand. He measured the position of the sun. He calculated. He found their position. "We need to go to Spain," he said. "Northeast." "How far?" asked Richardson. 800 miles. Silence. Everyone knew. Impossible. But they would try. There was no other choice. The first day was hopeful. The wind was favorable, the sea calm. They rowed, slowly but steadily. Briggs held the course. Sarah held little Sophia in her arms. The child was crying, not understanding what was happening. "It's okay, sweetheart," Sarah said. "Daddy will take us home." But Sarah knew. There was fear in her eyes, because home was very far away. Night fell, cold, dark. The stars shone. Briggs looked at them, checked their position. They were still going in the right direction, but they were very slow. The second day was harder. Their arms ached. Their hands were blistered. But they continued, because stopping meant dying. On the third day, the sun grew harsher. No water, no food. Lips cracked, tongues swelled. Briggs shared his water with his wife. Richardson tried to motivate the crew. "Keep going, just a little more. We can do this." But there were limits to human strength. On the fourth day, no one spoke, because speaking required energy, and there was no energy left. They just rode, with mechanical, robotic movements. With every stroke, a little more exhausted, a little closer to death. Time grew heavy, hours blurred together. The sun rose, climbed, set, but no one noticed. Sophia was no longer crying. She had no strength left to cry. Her tiny body had gone limp. Sarah rocked her, pressed her to her chest, kissed her lips. She whispered into her ear, words she loved, familiar sounds. But her daughter's eyes were dull, staring into emptiness. Life was slowly withdrawing from her gaze. On the fifth day, someone collapsed. Who it was no longer mattered. Names had lost their meaning. The man lost consciousness. Richardson slapped him, shouted his name, shook him by the shoulders, but he did not come back. His body was still breathing, yes, but the breath was shallow, weak, as if it might stop completely at any moment. Briggs looked at his wife. Sarah was exhausted as well. Her lips were tinged with purple. Her eyes were sunken. Her shoulders had slumped. Sophia was still in her arms, but now she was motionless, very light, lighter than she should have been. "Sophia," Briggs said, his voice barely audible. "I know, Nathan," Sarah said. "I know. I'm sorry." "No," Sarah said softly. "This was not your fault. You made the right decision." But was it right? Had they stayed on the ship, perhaps they would have lived. The ship was sound. There was food. There was water. There had been no great explosion. There had only been fear. But in that moment, in the heat of that instant, the explosion had seemed real, and a captain, above all else, had to protect his wife and child. On the sixth day, when the sun reached its highest point in the sky, Sophia Matilda Briggs died. In her mother's arms, silently, without taking a single breath, as if she had simply fallen asleep. She was only 2 years old. Sarah did not scream. She did not cry. She only held her daughter tightly for minutes. The tears did not come because there were no tears left. The part of her that could cry had been exhausted. Briggs embraced his wife. The two of them sat side by side. They looked at the small body. She looked like a baby in a blue dress, silent, peaceful, as if she were in harmony with the sea. "Let's give her to the water," Briggs finally said. "Let the sea take her." Sarah slowly nodded her head. She kissed her daughter one last time, on her forehead, on her cheeks. Then, with trembling hands, she released her into the water. The small body slowly sank. The waves wrapped around her, and she became one with the sea. On the 7th day, someone else died, Arjen Martens. He was a Dutch sailor. He was young, strong. He had broad shoulders, hard hands, but without water, strength was useless. His eyes closed, his head fell to the side.
No one lifted him. No one had the strength left. On the 8th day, Edward Head died. He was the ship's cook. Once, the smell of food would spread across the deck, and his laughter would be heard. He was the one who lifted people's spirits. Now, he was silent, cold. There was no warmth left in his hands. On the 9th day, the Lorentzen brothers died. First Bose, hours later Volkert. They were holding each other. Even in their final moments, they did not separate. Brothers in the middle of the sea remained together forever. On the 10th day, Richardson died. His breathing was broken and uneven. He forced his eyes open and whispered, "Captain, forgive me. I couldn't do it." Nathan leaned closer. He softened his voice. "You did, Albert," he said. "You fought well." But Richardson could no longer hear. He was already gone. On the 11th day, Gilling died. He was a Danish officer. With his last breath, he spoke his mother's name. He thought of the old woman waiting for him in Copenhagen. Perhaps he remembered his home, perhaps his childhood. Then his voice faded. On the same day, Goodschall also died. He was German, a quiet man. He had never complained. He had never shouted. He had only rowed until his final breath.
And then only two remained, Nathan and Sarah. They looked at each other. In the lifeboat, there was only their breathing left. They had been 10. Now they were 2. "I love you," said Nathan. "I love you too," Sarah replied. On the 12th day, Nathan died. His head was tilted back, his eyes fixed on the sky. Perhaps he saw the stars, perhaps his home, perhaps he saw nothing at all. He went quietly. Sarah was left alone in a small lifeboat in the middle of the endless ocean, surrounded by the dead. The waves struck gently against the wood. But did she die then, or did she go on living? Who knows? History did not record it, because no trace remained. Perhaps she lived one more day, perhaps 2, or perhaps she closed her eyes that very day. But in the end, one day, one morning, Sarah Elizabeth Briggs also went away. The ocean took her to her husband, her child, and the crew. And the small lifeboat was left empty. It rocked on the waves. Days passed, weeks passed. Perhaps a ship saw it, empty, silent, mysterious. Perhaps a storm broke it apart. Perhaps the ocean swallowed it whole. But no evidence remained. Mary Celeste was left alone in the Atlantic, without a course, without passengers, until the day Grotta found her. This is only a theory. Perhaps it is true, perhaps it is not. No one truly knows, because 10 people died, and the dead do not speak. But on some nights, in the middle of the Atlantic, sailors tell strange stories. On foggy evenings, when the wind dies and the sea and sky seem to merge, they say they have seen a ship in the distance, drifting, silent, as if even the wind dared not touch it. No one on deck, no sound, no light, no signal.
and some swear on their lives that they saw figures on the deck. A man standing motionless at the helm. Beside him, a woman holding a child in her arms. Their faces cannot be seen, only silhouettes, the same color as the fog, as pale as the sea. Are these ghosts, traces left behind by memory, or tricks of sleepless nights tangled with the sound of waves? Who knows? The sea does not answer. The sea does not share its secrets.
Years passed. Mary Celeste changed hands. In 1873, James Winchester took the ship back. He repaired it, renewed the worn parts, and found a new crew. The ship's past was dark, its luck was bad, but it continued its voyages nonetheless. In 1874, while heading toward Trieste, its captain died. The records listed natural causes, but at night sailors spoke in low voices on the deck. "There is a curse," they said. No one dared to say it aloud, but the thought took root in their minds. In 1880, during a voyage to West Africa, the crew was struck by yellow fever. As the days passed, their strength faded and their fevers rose. 4 sailors lost their lives. Mary Celeste once again became associated with death. In 1884, the ship passed into the hands of a new owner. His name was Gilman C. Parker. He was from Boston, a man fond of money, not known for his honesty. Parker insured the ship for far more than its true value. Then he loaded it with cheap and worthless cargo. In the documents, however, this cargo was listed as expensive and valuable goods. On January 3, 1885, off the coast of Haiti, as they approached Rochelet's bank, Parker put his plan into action. He deliberately ran the ship aground. His aim was for the ship to sink so he could collect the insurance money. But things did not go as planned. The ship became wedged on the rocks, but did not take on water. Parker started a fire, but heavy rain extinguished the flames. Then he had holes cut into the hull, but Mary Celeste was still afloat, as if it were stubborn, as if it did not want to die. In the end, Parker gave up. He abandoned the ship to its fate, but the insurance company grew suspicious. An investigation was launched. The truth came out. Fraud was proven. Parker was arrested, put on trial, and found guilty. His career ended. He was driven into bankruptcy. Months later, much like the story of Mary Celeste itself, Parker's death was also mysterious. Some said suicide, some said a heart attack, and some whispered only a single word: curse.
Mary Celeste was left among the rocks. The waves slowly tore it apart. Years passed. The wood rotted, the metal rusted, and in the end, the ship disappeared. But its story continued to live on. In 1884, before Parker's fraud stories had come to light, a young writer became interested in this mysterious ship. His name was Arthur Conan Doyle. This writer, who would later create the character Sherlock Holmes, was in those years building his imagination upon the silence of the Mary Celeste. Doyle wrote a short story titled J. Habakkuk Jepson's Statement. In this story, the ship's name was written with a small change as Marie Celeste. It seemed like a simple spelling difference, but this change would affect the fate of the story. because what was told was entirely fictional. Pirate attacks, abductions, dramatic confrontations, scenes that had never happened in real life were poured onto the pages with powerful narration. When the story was published, it attracted great attention. It was so compelling that many people did not realize it was fiction. Over time, what was told spread by word of mouth. As the years passed, the real story of the Mary Celeste became intertwined with Doyle's imagination. The boundary between truth and fiction slowly blurred. It became difficult to tell which parts had happened and which had been written. Even today, many people believe that the Mary Celeste was seized by pirates. Yet this is not true. This idea is the trace of an imaginary narrative that flowed from a writer's pen. The truth is much quieter, much simpler, and perhaps for that very reason, much more tragic. Because some stories do not end with noise, but with silence. Modern researchers are still examining this event. Even as years pass, the questions do not disappear. Oceanographers, historians, accident experts, all of them pursue the same silent question among the dusty pages of old documents. Everyone has a theory, but no theory can bring back those people who vanished into the darkness of the night. In 2007, Anne McGregor revisited this mystery. In the documentary titled The True Story of the Mary Celeste, one of the most discussed theories was tested: the alcohol vapor theory.
A small ship model was built. Alcohol vapor leaking from the barrels was ignited in a controlled environment. A brief explosion occurred, visible to the eye, but not destructive. The ship did not break apart, nor did a large fire break out. It was only strong enough to create sudden fear, just as seen on the Mary Celeste. There was no serious physical damage, but the crew was gone. Some researchers turned to other possibilities: a waterspout, a sudden, short-lived but frightening natural phenomenon. Perhaps a darkening sky on the horizon, perhaps violent winds and people in panic. The captain thought the ship was about to sink. The crew abandoned the ship in haste, but the items left behind did not confirm this story. There was no evidence, only assumptions. Some went even further: an earthquake followed by a small tsunami, but no seismic records from those days were found. The sea was quiet. History was silent. Another theory was darker still: food poisoning, ergot fungus, hallucinations, reality and imagination blending together. But the inside of the ship was orderly. The dining table was not disturbed. The belongings were in their places. Madmen create chaos. There was no chaos here, only a deep silence. Every theory is interesting. Each seems to explain a part, but none can complete the whole. And perhaps we will never know. Perhaps this story has no ending. Perhaps some questions are not meant to be answered, but meant to be asked. Perhaps this is a good thing, because mysteries feed the imagination. They keep curiosity alive and draw people, in the silence of the night, slowly into a story. The story of the Mary Celeste is finished, but its echo still continues. That ship has long been lost beneath the sea or within time itself, but its name returns like the waves, in whispers, in retellings, in silent questions. Films have been made about it, novels have been written, songs have been composed. Every generation rediscovers the Mary Celeste, and every narrator retells the story in their own voice. Sometimes this story becomes a tragedy, the heavy price of human error.
Sometimes a dark mystery, a secret lost within the fog. Sometimes it is told like a chilling tale, but no matter how it is told, it is always fascinating. Because the Mary Celeste is not just a ship, it is a symbol of human weakness, of nature's silent yet absolute power, and of life's uncertainty. We humans make plans, we draw maps, we build dreams, we choose safe harbors and set out on journeys. But sometimes life deviates from the plan. Unexpected winds begin to blow. Invisible storms approach. Decisions are made in an instant, and the result is no longer under our control. The Mary Celeste reminds us of this. Control is often an illusion. Safety is never fully guaranteed. And sometimes, no matter how careful we are, no matter how prepared we seem, the mystery prevails. Perhaps some journeys are not made to reach a destination, but to be remembered. And now, as you listen to this story, as your mind slowly calms, let the questions fade away quietly, without searching for answers. Because night is not meant for questions, but for peace. Now close your eyes, take a deep breath, imagine that ship. The deck is empty, the sails are filled with wind, the waves gently strike the hull. The sun is setting, the sky turning from orange to purple. There is silence, but not complete silence, because if you listen carefully, you can hear sounds from afar. A child's laughter, playing, joyful. A woman's song, soft, sweet, melancholic. A man's whistle, standing at the helm, holding his course. Are they ghosts, memories, or just the wind? Maybe all of them, maybe none. But this is the story of the Mary Celeste, a story on the edge, at the intersection of truth and imagination, knowledge and mystery. And as the night deepens, as the stars multiply, that story continues in the waves, in the wind, in the silence, forever.
Now sleep is approaching. Your body is growing heavy. Your eyes are closing. Your breaths are slowing. And perhaps in your dream you see a ship, old, wooden, beautiful, gently rocking on the waves, alone, yet peaceful. And on the deck of the ship you see some figures, indistinct shapes, perhaps a family, holding each other, looking at one another, smiling, because the journey is over now. The search is over. Home has been found. The Mary Celeste has finally come to rest at the bottom of the Atlantic, silent and calm, and the 10 souls, Benjamin, Sarah, Sophia, and 7 brave sailors, are now together forever, beneath the sea, beneath the stars, in peace. Sleep well, and may your dreams be gentle. Good night.
you.